Reports show the cost of being a woman in America is much more expensive over the course of our lifetime than it is for our male counterparts. But these costs can run especially high for women of color when faced with not only breaking down financial barriers, but add in with that the cost of racism and how this can define a woman throughout her lifetime. So one woman is on a mission to not only talk about this issue, but be a part of the change. So let's bring in Anna Gifty Opoku-Agyemen. Thank you so much for being with us, Anna. She's an award-winning economist and author of the book, The Double Tax, How Women of Color Are Overcharged and Underpaid. Really appreciate you being with us this morning. In your book, you talk about how race plays a role with job opportunities, salaries, and generational wealth. And you term the coin double tax as the cost of racism and sexism. Explain to us what you mean.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Janae. This is such an honor. And so for those who are listening, the double tax is the compounded cost of racism and sexism. It's this idea that there are certain groups of women who lie at the axes of inequality. And because they lie at the axes of inequality, they are essentially facing a double tax, right? And so what I ultimately argue in the book is that these individual costs that women of color are dealing with actually become societal costs if left unchecked. One way to think about this is, let's say that you're living in a neighborhood and you see that your neighbor's house is on fire. Would you wait for that fire to be put out, or are you going to allow that fire to make its way to your doorstep? So addressing the double tax is very much about putting out that fire.
What a great way to point that picture to show that it is not just about how it impacts the individual, but as you said, the cost to society over time. So, Anna, according to federal data, the number of Black women who have their jobs have decreased by more than 300,000 nationally since President Trump took office. We've spoken about that here on ABC News Live. What's your take on these really staggering numbers?
Well, I think, Janae, you took the words out of my mouth. They're staggering, right? We're talking about 319,000 and counting. And I would argue here that, this is once again an example of the double tax. This is the work of Katika Roy that was cited in the New York Times last week. And essentially what we're seeing is really 319,000 breadwinners, 319,000 taxpayers. I think what folks don't understand is that when people exit the labor force, meaning that they're no longer looking for work and they're no longer working, that means that we're actually losing taxable income that goes back into society to fund things like streets, street lights, right, schools, that sort of thing. And so if we're missing that income from the economy, our economy is shrinking, our GDP is shrinking, but also the communities that you're a part of are becoming worse off.
And we appreciate you mentioning Katika Roy. She has been here on the show and really helped us dive deep into this issue as we're watching it unfold and get worse over time. Right. So, Anna, what are some actionable takeaways and solutions that people can take to help relieve women of these costs that you discuss in your book?
Thanks so much for asking that question. I think there's a number of different things that we could address, but maybe in regards to the workforce, what we can say is, if you're an employer right now and you have to lay off employees, I would think very carefully about what sort of severance package you're leaving them with, right? I think one thing that we want to make sure we're not doing is adding additional pressure onto folks who are already facing a very tough job market. And I think allowing folks to transition into the job search process with enough money so that they can survive is actually incredibly important. I think the other thing to notice too is that if you're an employer and you're right now considering whether or not you should lay off certain employees, I think you should think about what that layoff actually means, right? A lot of these women are relied on within their community and within their families. We know that, for example, Black mothers, 69% of them are the breadwinners of their household. So when you are laying off a Black woman, you're really taking away the familial income that is supporting towards in terms of their family. And so with all of that in mind, I would say some actionable takeaways is, if you're an employer, make sure that you have packages that actually support individuals. If you're a person who's looking for a job, I would say make sure that you're tapping into community resources and also workforce training programs that also have access to ways to find careers. And then I would also say, lastly, if you are a local, state, government, make sure that you have a job board that's available to folks in your community so that it's easy for them to transition into the job search process.
Anna Gifty Opoku-Agyemen, thank you so much for being with us today to talk about all the great work that you're doing. The double tax is available soon. Thank you so much, Anna.